Chapter 11. Across Stormy Waters. "What will happen to us?" Gabrielle whispered. "Our families won't know where to look for us." "And what will happen when Dupree and Mikhail return?" Suzette echoed. "What will they do when they find us here?" There was no answer. Suzette could smell freedom through the branches blocking their way. It smelled of earth, of the lake, of the nearing storm. She was desperate to break free and fill her lungs with it all. "Think," she commanded herself. She tried to focus on what they should do next, but her mind whirled with the conversation she'd overheard. Dupree and Mikhail were planning to load their furs and begin paddling back to Montreal tomorrow morning. Once they left, she would never have any way to prove her father's innocence. Only Dupree and Mikhail could say who had really stolen the pelts from the trading post. "Oh," Gabrielle's voice caught in a sob as she struggled against the barricade. Guilt crashed over Suzette. What had she done? Gotten into terrible trouble and taken her friend along with her. "You were responsible for this," Suzette told herself. "Now you must find a way to solve the problem." She took a deep breath, trying to think calmly. For solace, she let her fingers slide back into her beaver skin pouch. She touched her treasures, soothed by the memory of each gift. Grandmother, grandfather, Mama, and Papa. Each had given something to protect her, to make her strong. The reminder made her feel that her family was with her, helping her. Only Yellow Wing wasn't represented. Then she realized that Yellow Wing had given her his own gift that morning. She smiled faintly, remembering the words he had spoken, as he stood beside the fish trap. Suddenly Suzette scrambled to her feet. "We're doing this wrong," she told Gabrielle. "We're acting like Yellow Wing's trout. We already know we can't get out the way we got in. We need to see if there's another way out." Cautiously, Suzette began to explore the dark cave, moving her fingers along the rock walls. "There's nothing here," Gabrielle said doubtfully, but she joined the search. The girls pulled the heavy fur bales and barrels away from the rock walls so they could check every crack and cranny. Finally they gave up in defeat. "What now?" Gabrielle asked. Suzette could just make out her friend slumped against a fur bale in the dim light near the entrance. "I don't know. Not yet." Suzette felt a cold breeze stir through the musty cave. The storm was finally unleashing itself over the island. A moment later she smelled rain, heard the drops pounding the ground outside. "Think, Suzette, think." "The fish trap. I've got another idea," she said. "Let's try the ceiling." Starting at the entrance, the girls felt along the ceiling, slowly making their way toward the back of the cave. Suzette's fingers grew raw as she slid them along the cold stone. Sometimes rough, sometimes smooth, always unyielding. In the darkness, she stumbled on the uneven floor. Her shoulders began to ache. At the cave's highest point, near the back, Suzette could no longer reach the ceiling. She climbed on a barrel, but felt it wobble as she tried to stand. "Gabrielle, come help me. I need you to hold the barrel." Carefully she reached upward again. As her fingers moved along the rock, a few grains of dirt sifted onto her face. Suddenly something firm but pliable brushed her fingers. And pliable means something that you can bend. It's flexible. It's movable. She jerked her hand away. Taking a deep breath, she found it again. Recognition dawned. "Gabrielle, it's a tree root," she cried. She scrambled with both hands. "There's a place here that's not stone. It's earth." Suzette had the knife she'd used to cut the bulrushes tucked in her belt. Gabrielle found a rough stone near the cave entrance. They shoved a second barrel next the first for Gabrielle to stand on, and began to scrape above their heads. Dirt rained down on their faces and hair. Every so often they had to lower their arms and rest their aching shoulders. "We're not getting anywhere," Suzette finally cried in frustration, cradling a scraped knuckle. "Don't stop," Gabrielle said, scraping hard. "This is the only chance we have." It seemed as if the sun had time to rise and set again before Suzette's knife poked through to the surface. She wiggled the knife in the narrow hole. "We're through, Gabrielle," she cried. The soil came away more easily then, in rain-dampened clumps. Suzette used her knife to saw through several smaller roots, showering more dirt around them. Finally she felt cold raindrops spatter her face. "Rain, Gabrielle! I can feel it!" She squinted at the small hole they'd clawed above their heads. "I think I can squeeze through. Just give me a foot up." Then she stopped and looked at her friend. Suzette's whole body quivered with longing to be out of that dark place. This is your fault, she reminded herself. She cupped her hands. Here, you go first. Gabrielle didn't hesitate before stepping lightly into Suzette's hands with one moccasined foot. On their first try, the barrel tipped over, dumping them to the cave floor. Let me try again, she gasped. Straining to bear her friend's weight, Suzette watched Gabrielle's hands disappear through the hole. Then her head. Ooh! Gabrielle wheezed, struggling to force her shoulders through the narrow opening. Suzette fought to keep her balance as she pushed from below. Then Gabrielle grunted, and with a sudden burst, she was through. Her feet disappeared, and gray light shafted through the hole. Suzette felt a stab of abandonment. Gabrielle, she shouted, pull me up. This was harder. Gabrielle gripped Suzette's hands and pulled. For a long, painful moment, Suzette hung suspended, kicking her feet in the air, while Gabrielle tried to haul her through. Suzette's arms scraped against the sides. A root gouged her face. Mud was in her mouth, rain in her eyes. You're slipping, Gabrielle gasped. Suzette twisted frantically, shoving her shoulders through, then strained to plant one elbow on the ground. She fought with every muscle, refusing to fall back into the hole below. Another root dug into her ribs. Finally, she managed to brace both elbows on solid ground. Gabrielle reached under Suzette's arms and pulled. And she was free. She rolled away from the hole, suddenly slashed by driving rain. Gabrielle flopped beside her, breathing heavily, covered with mud. They were bruised and battered, and Suzette began to laugh. Thank you, Yellowwing, and thank you, Gabrielle. We made it out. We did it. We did it, Gabrielle echoed. I didn't think we'd ever get out of there. And she laughed, too. After a few moments, Suzette sat up and looked around. They were on top of the rocky bluff. The distant mainland was entirely veiled in mist. Pointe Island was no more than a faint shadow. The sky was low and gray, the rain pouring down. The great lake was gray, too, restless, choppy with white-capped waves. The last bits of Suzette's laughter died away. Gabrielle was looking across the lake, too. We'll have to wait out the storm before heading back, she said quietly. Suzette knew the danger of canoeing in such weather, but how else could she save Papa? We've already lost so much time, Gabrielle, she protested. We've got to get back to the post before Dupree leaves for Montreal tomorrow. If we don't leave soon, we might have to spend the night here. I'd rather spend the night here than drown. Do you want to be here when those men come back in the morning? Gabrielle hesitated. She shoved a strand of dripping black hair away from her face. Please, Gabrielle, if Captain D'Amboise and Baptiste can catch those men, maybe they can make Dupree say who traded the striped beaver pelts to him. What makes you think Dupree will tell? I don't know if he will, but I don't have any other ideas left. If Dupree paddles back to Montreal, I'll never be able to prove that Papa didn't steal those furs. Captain D'Amboise will keep him locked up for 13 more suns, then send us all away. Her voice began to tremble. And we have no place to go, Gabrielle. No place to go. Gabrielle wiped cold rain from her face as she stared across the water to Pointe. Do you really think we can make it across? Suzette reached down. Her pouch was still in place, tied onto her belt. She reached inside and fingered her treasures, the stone, the crucifix, the turtle, the root. Yes, she said finally. We're both strong. We can do it. Gabrielle rubbed her arms with her hands. She still isn't sure, Suzette thought desperately. Making an effort to be heard above the wind and rain, she forced out words almost too unbearable to say. What I'm most afraid of is that Papa will have to go back to Montreal, and Mama will have to stay here, and they'll make me pitch which I'm going to be, French or Ojibwe. Tears burned her eyes, blurring with raindrops. Oh, Gabrielle, what if they make me choose? For a long moment Gabrielle didn't move or speak. Then she got up and began picking her way down the rain-slick hill toward the spot where they'd hidden the canoe. Suzette jumped up and followed carefully down the rocky slope, hanging on to the gnarled pine trees. The girls didn't speak again until the canoe was in the water and they'd stepped inside. Paddling will keep us warm, Suzette called, and we'll have a hot meal waiting. Think about that. Gabrielle didn't answer. Suzette pointed the canoe toward Pointe Island. bent her head against the driving rain, and began to paddle. Suzette was strong. She had been out with Papa in stormy waters, and paddled on inland rivers where currents tried to decide where the canoe should go. But she'd never paddled like this before. The waves tossed the fragile canoe like a leaf in a stream. The wind tried to push them off course. Suzette paddled with the force of her whole body, straining, leaning, pushing. From time to time she glanced up, checking to make sure they were still on course. But she didn't let herself think about how far they had to go, how slowly they were progressing. Finally she stopped thinking altogether and gave in to the rhythm. Stroke, lift, stroke, lift. She ignored the ache in her bruised hand, ignoring the fire growing in her neck, along her shoulders, down her arms. Ignored her icy feet, soaked in the rainwater pooled at the bottom of the canoe. Ignored the fear gnawing at her belly. Stroke, lift, stroke, lift. The gray sky had deepened almost to charcoal before Suzette sensed a lessening in the struggle. She dared to look and saw the shoreline of La Pointe emerging from the mist, each rock and tree a wonderful sight. "Gabrielle, we're almost there," Suzette called. Somehow she found the strength to keep paddling until the canoe was bobbling a stone's throw from shore. Gabrielle put her paddle down and slumped forward. Suzette held her blade in the water, keeping the canoe pointed away from the rocks, and rested too. But they weren't home yet. Should they keep paddling along the shore toward the fort and the Ojibwe camp? Or beach the canoe and wait until dawn? She wasn't sure. And now that she'd stopped paddling, she didn't know if she could start again. A confusing flicker from the south caught her attention. Then she recognized a torch. Someone was shouting their names. A canoe slid from the shadows. It was Gabrielle's papa and Yellow Wing. The other canoe pulled alongside theirs. "Thank God," Gabrielle's father cried. "We've looked everywhere for you." In the flickering light of the torch, Yellow Wing's face was drawn. "Suzette! Oh, Suzette, I'm so glad we found you." "Not Suzette," she mumbled. Grandmother's voice quavered in her memory. "I named you because of a dream of you paddling across stormy waters." "Not Suzette," she said again. "Today, my name is Ajoak."